talk tonight. And I'll have to apologize because I think he gave us an excellent example of the considerate statesmanship that is required in order to face this country's future. And what I have to do, I do with a little bit of an apology, because though I have been a practiced diplomat, given the crisis that Bill has talked about, I have to tell you, I think the time for diplomacy, the time for niceties, the time for civility, as they're always talking about in our politics, is done.
Yes.
You know why some of these folks want us to be civil? Because they want us to stand by, politely tut-tutting, while they destroy our country's security, while they destroy our country's constitution, while they destroy our people's sovereignty and sell us, all of us, down the river for the sake of their ideology and their cliques of power. And they sure don't want us speaking up about it. You can see it in the way that they reacted at the town hall meetings. And those were meetings, by the way, all the citizens came polite, but well armed with questions about the policies that were being implemented in order to consolidate power and control over the life and death decisions of health care in the hands of politicians and bureaucrats. Seems to me that our common sense tells us that if you want to have a quality health care system, you consolidate control of those decisions in the hands of the doctors and the people who are being treated, not in the hands of politicians and power brokers in Washington. But not these guys. So, you know, folks came, they were politely armed with some questions because they wanted some clarifications on the provisions that looked like that they were going to require that if you were getting up in years a little bit, and it looked like you had fewer years to go than you had already lived, maybe it wasn't worthwhile to spend so much money on you. Remember that? I distinctly remember. First they denied it, and then when people trotted out the language and showed the provisions and so forth and so on, then they hid it, and then they just started getting angry with people and telling them to go away, and how dare you ask questions about this, and all of that. It looked like they didn't want to be held accountable for what they were about to do. And when people looked at that and said, you know what that amounts to? That amounts to rationing. That amounts to achieving budgetary savings off the back and at the expense of the lives of the very people to whom we owe this country's present, because they helped to build it with their faith and with their sacrifice and with their perseverance and with their work and their initiative and their courage. And then they're going to approach the end of their lives and we're going to tell them we don't have what it takes to keep them around a little longer. I'll tell you something. I don't know too many people who look at grandma and grandpa and say they don't want another year, another 2 years, another however many years we can get. Because that wisdom won't come again. Because that love won't come again. And we are not ready to give it up. But the bureaucrats tell us we got to, Ellen. They tell us that this is the way to do it. But the sad truth is that there are common sense ways you could save on health care. They don't want to look at them. They don't want to consider that every country that's walked down the road of this government control, this socialism, has, instead of getting access for everybody to health care, they get access to some people who are friends of the party bosses and have the power and wealth. Other people get access to long lines where they wait for health care.
Yeah.
Things that Americans wouldn't tolerate for a second. And they tell us they're going to reform the system. The reason I go through that at some length is because I think what's going on with health care actually illustrates the real goal of what is happening overall. These are people who are coming forward and telling us they want to change things and improve things and give everybody hope. And then when you look at what's actually going on, what they're really after is to make sure they have the power, they have the decisions, they have the control, and they don't care what they have to destroy in the process. They don't care if they have to destroy the prospects of our future generations, burdening them with a debt that now stretches out to the horizon. It won't be paid by our children and our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren. It could be paid by 5 and 10 generations of Americans to come. But by the time they even approach finishing that job, they will no longer be paying as Americans. They'll be paying as the serfs and bond slaves and debt slaves of whatever foreign countries we happen to have borrowed that money from on our youth. It's time we stopped it. I think that being a lot of Americans, now we are people who generally, I think, can become preoccupied with the things that are required in order to make sure we're getting some of our main jobs done. Part of the reason I think sometimes things go a little further in American politics than they ought to is that Americans tend, in the first instance, to follow what I think of as the oxygen mask principle of common sense approach to life. You know how when you're on an airplane and they tell you what the emergency equipment is? The steward or stewardess will always explain to you that they have the oxygen mask there, and if the pressure in the cabin should fail, the oxygen mask will fall, and you should put it over your head this way and that, and make sure that you put your oxygen mask on yourself before you help others. And that's so that while you're helping others, you don't die of oxygen starvation yourself. That's a reasonable principle, don't you think? Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of Americans realize also one of those principles that you think it through, and it's actually the recipe to great success. If everybody does absolutely all they can to take care of themselves and the people who are part of that circle for whom they are responsible, we don't have poverty, we don't have crime, we don't have all these things that then have to be taken care of with government expenditures and government programs and the political machinations of politicians who say they represent us. So Americans have common sense enough to know that we shouldn't fail in our obligation to ourselves and our family and our immediate community, and they pay a lot of attention to those things. But meanwhile, they have been in the habit of trying to do what they have the right to do as a result of this great Constitution of ours, and that is elect representatives to go to Washington, who should be like the folks you send if you're living in a city in the old days that was surrounded by a big wall. You would send folks to stand on the wall. And then you'd send other people out further into the countryside, and they were supposed to be watching and spying out to see if there were any problems and dangers on the horizon, so you could get fair warning. You'll be back in the city. You'll be making sure the food is grown, and the things are prepared, and the furniture is done, and the houses are built, and all these fine things that keep life going are done. And meanwhile, you just send a few folks to be on the lookout. And that's why we sent some people from our towns and cities to our state government, and some people from our state to our national government, and some people into the military and the intelligence forces. Keep an eye on that world and make sure that we're able to deal with threats and dangers and spy out opportunities in time to do something about them. But you know what I think has now gotten a lot of folks shocked and dismayed? They woke up one day and they found that all of those people who should have been looking out for the dangers to this great country of ours, looking out for our borders and looking out for our money and looking out for our security and looking out for the integrity of our Constitution and our liberty so that we could pass those things on to our children. We looked up and it turned out that they weren't looking out for anybody but themselves. They weren't looking out for anybody but their own power, but their own cliques, but the people who helped to keep them where they were. They weren't looking out for anything or anybody except what could serve their power and lift them up to more power after that. And here I got to say something. Right? Before you all applaud, I am going to say something that Bill can't say, but that needs to be said, see? Because it explains to my heart why it is that Bill Johnson, who, as he said, doesn't have experience in politics, hasn't been part of all of this before, why he is impelled to step forward right now. Do you know why that is? Because when you have sent folks, and some of them have even worn a label that we kind of trusted, and other folks have made all kinds of promises. I'm a conservative, I'm for fiscal responsibility. And I believe in a strong defense. And I'm going to go to Washington and stand guard against those bad guys so that they won't be spending our money and letting our security rot and so forth and so on. And then it turns out, now I will be frank about this. We gathered together over the course of years, and we worked so that folks who wore a label that we thought we could trust, they ended up first controlling the White House for many years.